Darkly Dreaming Dexter, Chapter 20. I stood as close as I could get to the tableau without actually touching it, just looking. The little altar had not been dusted for prints yet. Nothing had been done to it at all, although I had presumed pictures had been taken. And oh, how I wanted a copy of one of those pictures to take home, poster-sized and in full, bloodless color. If I had done this, I was a much better artist than I had ever suspected. Even from this close, the heads seemed to float in space, suspended above the mortal earth in a timeless, bloodless parody of paradise, literally cut off from their bodies. Their bodies. I glanced around. There was no sign of them, no telltale sack of carefully wrapped packages. There were only the pyramid of heads. I stared some more. After a few moments, Vince Masuka swam slowly over. His mouth opened, his face pale. "Dexter," he said, and shook his head. "Hello, Vince," I said. He shook his head again. "Where are the bodies?" He just stared at the heads for a long moment. Then he looked at me with a face full of lost innocence. "Somewhere else," he said. There was a clutter on the stairs, and the spell was broken. I moved away from the tableau as LaGuardia came in with a few carefully selected reporters. Nick Something and Rick Sungray from local TV, and Eric the Viking, a strange and respected columnist from the newspaper. For a moment, the room was very busy. Nick and Eric took one look and ran back down the stairs with their hands covering their mouths. Rick Sungray frowned deeply, looked at the lights, and turned to LaGuardia. "Is there a power outlet?" "I gotta get my camera guy," he said. LaGuardia shook her head. "Wait for those other guys," she said. "I need pictures," Rick Sungray insisted. Sergeant Dokes appeared behind Sungray. The reporter looked around and saw him. "No pictures," Dokes said. Sangre opened his mouth, looked at Dokes, and for a moment, and then closed his mouth again. Once again, the sterling qualities of the good sergeant had saved the day. He went back and stood protectively by the displayed body parts, as if it was a science fair project and he was its guardian. There was a strained coughing sound at the door, and Nick Something and Eric the Viking returned, shuffling slowly up the stairs and back onto the floor like old men. Eric wouldn't look at the far end of the room. Nick tried not to look, but his head kept drifting around toward the awful sight, and then he would snap back his face to LaGuardia again. LaGuardia began to speak. I moved close enough to hear. I asked you three to come see this thing before we allow any official press coverage, she said. "But can we cover it unofficially?" Rick Sangray interrupted. LaGuardia ignored him. "We don't want any wild speculation in the press about what happened here," she said. "As you can see, this is a vicious and bizarre crime." She paused for a moment and said very carefully, "Unlike anything we had ever seen before." You could actually hear her capitalize the letters. Nick Something said, "Huh," and looked thoughtful. Eric the Viking got it immediately. "Whoa, wait a minute," he said. "You're saying this is a brand new killer? A whole different set of murders?" LaGuardia looked at him with great significance. "Of course it's too soon to say anything for sure," she said, sounding sure. "But let's look at this thing logically, okay? First." She held up a finger. "We got a guy who confessed about the other stuff. He's in jail, and we didn't let him out to do this. Second, this doesn't look like anything I ever saw, does it? Because there's three, and they're stacked up all pretty, okay?" Bless her heart, she had noticed. "Why can't I get my camera guy?" Rick Sangray asked. "Wasn't there a mirror found at one of the other murders?" Eric the Viking said, asking weakly, trying very hard not to look. "Have you identified the Nick something said. His head started to turn toward the display, and he caught himself. Snapped back around to LaGuardia. Are the victims prostitutes, detective? Listen, LaGuardia said. She sounded a little annoyed, and a small trace of Cuban accent showed in her voice for just a second. Let me explain something. I don't care if they're prostitutes. I don't care if they got a mirror. I don't care about any of that. She took a breath and went on much calmer. We got the other killer locked up in the jail. We've got a confession. This is a whole new thing, okay? That's the important thing. You can see it. This is different. Then why are you assigned to it? Asked Eric the Viking, very reasonably, I thought. LaGuardia showed shark teeth. I solved the other one, she said. But you're sure this is a brand new killer, detective? Rick Sangre asked. There's no question. I can't tell you any details, but I got lab work back to back me up. I was sure she meant me. I felt a small thrill of pride. But this is kind of close, isn't it? Same area, same general technique, Eric the Viking started. LaGuardia cut him off. Totally different, she said. Totally different. So you're completely satisfied that Mikhail committed all those murders and that this one is different, Nick something said. 100%, LaGuardia said. Besides, I never said Mikhail did the others. For a second, the reporters all forgot the horror of not having pictures. What? Nick something finally said. LaGuardia blushed, but insisted. I never said Mikhail did it. Mikhail said he did it, okay? So what am I supposed to do? Tell him to go away? I don't believe you? Eric the Viking and Nick something exchanged a meaningful glance. I would have, too, if I had only been there, someone for me to look at. So instead I peeked at the central head of the altar. I peeked at the central head on the altar. It didn't actually wink at me, but I'm sure it was just as amazed as I was. That's nuts, Eric muttered, but he was overrun by Rick Sangre. Are you willing to let us interview Mikhail? Sangre demanded with a camera present. We were saved from LaGuardia's answer by the arrival of Captain Matthews. He clattered up the stairs and stopped dead as he saw our little art exhibit. Jesus Christ, he said, and then his gaze swung up to the group of reporters around LaGuardia. What the hell are you guys doing up here? He asked. LaGuardia looked around the room, but nobody volunteered anything. I let them in, she said finally, unofficially, off the record. You didn't say off the record, Rick Sangre blurted out. You just said unofficially. LaGuardia glared at him. Unofficially means off the record. Get out, Matthews barked. Officially and on the record, out. Eric the Viking cleared his throat. Captain, do you agree with Detective LaGuardia on this brand new string of murders? A different killer? Out, Matthews repeated. I'll answer the questions downstairs. I need footage, Rick Sangre said. It would only take a minute. Matthews nodded towards the exit. Sergeant Dokes. Dokes materialized and took Rick Sangre's elbow. Gentlemen, he said in his soft and scary voice. The three reporters looked at him. I saw Nick something swallow hard, and they all three turned without a sound and trooped out. Matthews watched them go. When they were safely out of earshot, he turned on LaGuardia. Detective, he said in a voice so venomous he must have learned it from Dokes. If you ever pull this kind of shit again, you'll be ever so lucky to get a job doing parking lot security at Walmart. LaGuardia turned pale green and then bright red again. Captain, I just wanted, she said, but Matthews had already turned away. He straightened his tie and combed his hair back with one hand and chased down the stairs after the reporters. I turned to look at the altar again. It hadn't changed, but they were starting to dust for prints now. Then they would take it apart to analyze the pieces. Soon it would all just be a beautiful memory. I trundled off downstairs to find Deborah. Outside, Rick Sangre already had a camera rolling. Captain Matthews stood in the wash of lights with microphones thrusting at his chin, giving his official statement. Always the policy of the department to leave the investigating officer autonomy of the case until such time as it becomes evident that a series of major errors in judgment call for the officer's competence into question. That time has not yet to arrive, but I am monitoring the situation closely. With so much at stake, the community... I spotted Deborah, and I moved past them. She stood past the barrier of yellow tape dressed in her blue patrol uniform. Nice suit, I told her. I like it, she said. You saw? I saw, I told her. I also saw Captain Matthews discussing the case with Detective LaGuardia. Deborah sucked in her breath. What did they say? I patted her arm. I think once I heard Dad use a very colorful expression that would cover it, he was reaming her a new asshole. Do you know that one? She looked startled, then pleased. That's great. Now I really do need your help, Dex. As opposed to what I've been doing, of course. I don't know what you think you've been doing, but it isn't enough. So unfair, Deb, and so very unkind. After all, you are actually at a crime site and wearing your uniform too. Would you prefer the sex suit? She shuddered. That's not the point. You've been holding back something about all this all along, and I want it now. For a moment, I had nothing to say. Always an uncomfortable feeling. I had no idea she was this perspective. Why, Deborah? Listen, you think I don't know about how this political stuff works? And maybe I'm not, as smart as you are, but I know they're all going to be busy covering their own asses for a while, which means nobody's going to be doing any real police work, which means you see a chance to do some of your own. Bravo, Debs. And it also means I need help like never before. She put a hand out and squeezed mine. Please, Dexy. I don't know what shocked me more, her insight, her hand squeezing, or her use of the nickname Dexy. I hadn't heard her say that since I was about 10 years old. Whether she intended it or not, when she called me Dexy, she put us both firmly back in Harryland, a place where family mattered and obligations were as real as headless hookers. What could I say? Of course, Deborah, I said. Dexy, indeed. It was almost enough to make me feel emotion. Good, she said, and she was all business again. A wonderfully quick exchange that I had to admire. What's the one thing that really sticks out right now? She asked with a nod towards the second floor. The body parts, I said. As far as you know, is anybody looking for them? Deborah gave me one of her new worldly cop looks, the sour one. As far as I know, there are more officers assigned to keeping the TV cameras out than doing any actual work on this thing. Good, I said. If we can find the body parts, we might get a small jump on things. Okay, where do we look? It was a fair question, which naturally put me at a disadvantage. I had no idea where to look. Would the limbs be left in the killing room? I didn't think so. It seemed messy to me. And if he wanted to use the same room again, it would be impossible with that kind of nasty clutter lying around. All right, then. And then I would assume the rest of the meat had gone somewhere else, but where? Or perhaps it slowly dawned on me. The real question should be why? The display of the heads was for a reason. What would the reason for putting the rest of the bodies somewhere else be? Simple concealment? No. Nothing was simple with this man. And concealment was evidently not a virtue he prized too highly. Especially right now, when he was showing off a bit. That being the case, where would he leave the stack of leftovers? Well, Deborah demanded, how about it? Where should we look? I shook my head. I don't know, I said slowly. Wherever he left the stuff, it's part of his statement. And we're not really sure what his statement is yet, are we? God damn it, Dexter. I know he wants to rub our noses in it. He said he needs to say that we did something incredibly dumb. And even if we hadn't, he's still smarter than we are. So far, he's right, she said, putting on her grouper face. So, wherever he dumped the stuff, it had to continue that statement. That we're stupid. No, I'm wrong. That we did something stupid. Right, very important difference. Please, Deb, you'll hurt your face like that. It is important because he's going to comment on the act, not on the actors. That's really good, Dex. So we should probably head for the nearest diner, theater, and look around for an actor with blood up to his elbows, right? I shook my head. No, blood. Deb, none at all. That's the most important thing. How can you be so sure? Because there's been no blood at any of the scenes. That's deliberate, and it's vital to what he's doing. And this time he'll repeat the same important parts, but comment on what he's already done. Because we've missed it, don't you see? Sure, I see. Makes perfect sense. So why don't we go and check on the Office Depot Center? He's probably got the body stacked up in the net again. I opened my mouth to make some wonderfully clever reply. The hockey rink was all wrong. Completely and obviously wrong. It had been an experiment. Something different, but I knew he wouldn't repeat it. I started to explain this to Deb, that the only reason he would ever repeat the rink would be... I stopped dead. My mouth hanging open. Of course, I thought. Naturally. Now who's making a fish face, huh? Was it Dex? For a moment, I didn't say anything. I was far too busy trying to catch my whirling thoughts. The only reason he would repeat the hockey rink was to show us we had the wrong guy locked up. Oh, Deb, I said at last, of course you're right. The arena. You are right for all the wrong reasons, but still, beats the hell out of being wrong, she said, and headed for her car.